All right, welcome everyone to a work session of Mount Crested Butte Town Council. The topic tonight is 9380 real estate elevation declaration. And to start us off with Neil, starting off.
Yeah, good evening, councilors, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Neil Stark, Community Development Director. This is intended to be a fairly informal work session. And before we start, we do have a lot of representatives from the elevation present, so maybe some introductions, just so everyone remembers who's who.
Yeah. So I'm Nick Klaus, that most of you and toured you on the property.
Yeah, so my name is Riley Gitness. I'm with the South Street Partners team. We were the group that came in and partnered with Woodhouse on the elevation hotel.
And then Peter Lundberg.
Hey everyone, can you guys, hopefully you guys can hear me. Great to be with everyone and exciting to be speaking again since our last meeting, as we've since closed on our equity investment in the elevation.
Sorry, I was absent at the last meeting. Which organization is he with?
So South Street Partners, they came in about a month ago and are a new equity partner and bring a lot of development expertise to the table. Help us with the renovation and remodel. And then
I'm Scott Walton from Southeast, helping Nick and all the players here.
I've got a couple of informal people that are just listening in, so we've engaged architecture group, Hart Howerton, to kind of do an initial analysis of the renovation plan. So that's what we've been spending time on the property.
Thank you.
So we brought a couple representatives from Hart Howerton, who's the architecture firm who engaged initially to help us with the analysis of the renovation. So we've been spending time with them on property today, so they wanted to join us and listen in.
I got staff comments. There's been a lot of discussion with elevation regarding the renovation and remodel of the elevation. But the specific request that is before council is their request to amend section 12.2 of the elevation plan community declaration. And this would specifically remove the short-term rental restrictions that the town put in place as a part of the declaration back in 2007. And staff believed that there needed to be some additional discussion with the council regarding potential ramifications associated with the removal of those short-term restrictions. A lot of that has been defined within the staff memo, but just some background. Again, that elevation plan community declaration goes back to November 8th of 2007. And in addition, since that time, back in, well, let's get to that after we go through some of these some of the issues, which really to be as concise as possible and open up the discussion, certainly from the elevation. The elevation is the largest hotel on the mountain. The other two are the Grand Lodge and Nordic Inn that are traditionally operated somewhat like hotels. The Grand Lodge has 225 rooms, the Nordic Inn 13 rooms, but the elevation has 262 hotel rooms that are all deed restricted or declaration restricted to short-term rentals, which means it needs to function as essentially a hotel. The intent back in 2007, I think, was under the town wanted to maintain a hotbed on the mountain. There was a lot of discussion of that since then, and how would this amendment potentially, when you remove those hotbeds with a short-term requirement, affect the long-term visitor accommodations for the town and on the mountain. So the applicant has identified that the remodel and renovation would include taking 120 hotel rooms and converting those to 40 long-term residential rooms. So that would leave a balance of about 140 hotel rooms with no limitations if the amendment was approved to be used as short-term rentals. And as there would be no requirement. The town would like to maintain tourist accommodations on the mountain. The applicant has identified that section. They'd like to maintain those as the approximately 140 rooms as a 4-star hotel and upgrade those hotel rooms and right-size capacity. But they provided no details about how that would be handled or if there would be any restrictions placed upon them. The second part of the discussion we thought was appropriate is that the elevation indicates they are currently leasing approximately 70 of the current 262 resort units to long-term tenants. Approximately 46 of those rooms are dedicated elevation employees, with the balance of the 26 units being rented to third-party tenants, probably CDMR and a couple, I think, local businesses leasing those. As part of their intention would be to provide on a volunteer basis what they consider to be the right number of workforce housing units for employee elevation employees into the future. So the little concern there has been no transition plan or any type of protection for those existing workforce housing units that are currently being utilized at the elevation. The third, which certainly is about proposed legislation at the state legislature, has to do with the bill that has been offered that would tax short-term rentals as commercial properties. There's a lot of concern throughout the planning community that this could potentially, once people see what the change in commercial rates from residential rates, which is how county assessors currently tax SDRs as residential units, from 7% to 29% tax, could have a huge impact on the industry, could lead to the potential for a large number of those units being withdrawn from the marketplace. And so you don't want to create the perfect storm with the loss of hotel rooms, loss of workforce housing, and then potential for loss of short-term rentals. And what would the town then do with housing for tourist accommodations on that? So we wanted to be somewhat long term look down the road beyond just this current application as well. So those are the 3 points that staff has brought. Certainly if the councilors have more they wish to discuss, and certainly a response from the applicant. As I said, it's an informal discussion I'd like to have tonight.
All right. I think to just bring the issue a little bit, I know Peter would like to say a couple words as well. You know, I think in the previous work session, we walked through our plan, and I think why we see the logic in reducing the hotel room count based on historic occupancy levels, which is hovered around 40%. The product mix just isn't appropriate, especially with the advent of VRBO and Airbnb. People are looking for more 2 and 3 bedroom product, and I think what the original intent of the short-term rental restriction back in 2007 is just a different world we live in today, where there's not a hotbed issue because of the advent of Airbnb and VRBO. So we laid out what our revenue forecasts were based on a more right-sized hotel and residential condo rentals and, you know, and we've got a lot of data on what those aren't, we're not gonna lose those beds just because we sell them into a residential condo program. You know, we think at least 75% will put those units back into the rental pool. So you're not gonna lose those, you're actually gonna increase occupancy because you've got a better product mix that is more attractive to today's customer. So I think those are two things to point out. You know, we think it's actually gonna drive more hotbeds, to people who are desirable and bring more vibrancy and sales tax revenue to the base area. And, you know, while South Street has come in as our equity partner, there's, without getting these restrictions lifted, you know, there's no guarantees that we're gonna put this additional capital into the renovation unless we can get what we feel is appropriate restrictions lifted to maximize the value of the property and drive the right occupancy. So I'll leave it to Peter to say.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. And I would just add, you know, certainly, as Nick mentioned, it will, you know, hinder our ability to more, you know, cast a wider net if 12.2 kind of stays in place as is, just given, you know, that buyer, while I think, as Nick mentioned, is likely, you know, we think something like 30 to 35 of these 40 units will be put back into a rental pool. Just having the restriction, you know, limits what we view we could get on a sellout for the unit. And while I certainly realize, you know, it's a bit of, you know, our problem as a developer, you know, just point out we're certainly, you know, prepared to make a very large investment into the town and into the base area. You know, I think, you know, some preliminary numbers have certainly been verbalized, but you know, we view this as a $50+ million project, and as Nick mentioned, you know, as the hotel's kind of operating today as a, you know, 3+ star product, you know, we'd like to take that to a 4+ star product that is not, you know, operating at sub 50% occupancy. You know, we really think our program is going to increase the marketability of the hotel, increase the tax revenues coming to the town, increase the profitability of the operation, of course, which we understand. But this issue has certainly been something that, you know, while we have provided kind of closing capital today to step into the equity investment, you know, our view on how we approach kind of the next 2 years and capital spend really does depend on the outcome of 12.2 here.
Address the other issue, the workforce housing issue, that's been a business necessity of ours, and you know, we're not going to go put $50 to $60 million into a property that we can't then operate and have the guest experience of someone that's going to spend $2 or $3 million on a condo and, you know, pay $400 to $500 a night for a hotel. You know, that wouldn't make sense from a business perspective. So we're certainly going to solve the workforce housing issue on our own, whether that's on property, off property, that's for us to resolve. And I think, you know, we leased rooms to Vail, because it made business sense for us, but it also helped the guest experience. But, you know, that's not necessarily our responsibility to solve Vail's workforce housing issue.
Well, and I'd add, we certainly want to help, and we view it as such a critical issue. We understand we can't run a 140 plus or minus key hotel and 40 rental, you know, 2 to 3 bedroom condo units with a labor pool that, you know, isn't proximate enough to the hotel to come operate. So I think, you know, our view is we understand how many units we're providing. That being said, you know, on a go forward basis, we probably view it as not the best use of the space at, you know, kind of the base mountain if we're looking to, you know, expand tax revenues coming in to the town, expand kind of what we view this becoming a, you know, 4 to 4.5 star product. It's just, you know, having kind of $80 to $100 per night units that we're supplying to workforce housing. Having said that, I understand we have the deed restriction on the units above the garage. We've engaged an architect to look at expanding those from, call it 4 units to 12 units. We have looked at a number of, as you guys understand, we have 2 floors of kind of I'd say common areas, meeting space that, we're probably not utilizing today. We're certainly going to engage engineers and architects to look at that. We've toured a number of assets, both in town, in Gunnison, well north of the asset, but within 30 minutes, I'd say, that could help solve, adding an additional 30 to 50 beds to the project. We certainly don't take the workforce housing, issue lightly at all. We would not be able to operate the hotel to the extent we would need to without this. So, while we do, view our business plan as, yes, having these units on site is not the best use of the space, we do need to figure this out.
So I think our goal is just to, from our last meeting, it seemed like everyone was very supportive of, moving forward with 12.2. So just getting some feedback from council that gives us some direction of how we can move forward. So it allows us to, continue to move forward in the redevelopment process and engage architects and continue spending money with confidence that we're going to be able to solve this.
On the affordable housing bit, Neil, so I know there's 4 units that are designated for that. Is anything in this trigger additional requirements?
No. 12.12, I think, from the adoption of the declaration in 2007 required 4 units to be set aside as, and they're existing, 4 units for affordable housing employment. There's nothing associated with the amendment to this that would trigger any type of affordable housing requirements.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand how the ownership is gonna work. Are y'all selling individual condo units to people? Or is the ownership gonna be between you guys and the investors only? How's that? Because nothing in here explains that.
Oh, sorry, I thought we kind of walked through it in some previous presentations, but the goal would be to take somewhere between for sale product of 35 to 45 units, depending on the product mix, and that would be taking probably 120 to 130 of the current units, combining them into 2 and 3 bedroom condos, selling those to individual third parties who we believe, based on other markets that we have experience with, historically, put those back in the rental pool at about 75%.
Yeah, and those final units, I would just add to, we took a very hard look at the additional product in the market, the comps, West Wall, additional ski units. So we feel confident that these will get put back into a rental pool. They're going to be built to, call it 15 to 1600 square foot specs, 2 to 3 bedrooms, small kitchens. These are certainly not 3 to 4,000 square foot condos for families to live in or anything like that. These will be certainly things that individuals that want to acquire real estate, but they'll be sharing in as these go back into a rental pool.
I have a problem with this because, I'm aware of how the Lodge at Mountaineer Square works, and West Wall, I believe, works under the same, operation that owners of the units have the choice of whether they want a short-term lease, be part of the hotel rental pool or not. And if they choose to do that, then they pay the short-term rental fees. And they have other complexes that have to pay it where yours wouldn't. I think it's gonna create an uproar.
Well, if this the short-term rental restriction is lifted, you would have to get a short-term rental license for every unit in the hotel. And it's I was mentioning to Neil, you originally wanted this on as an agenda item tonight. And if the council had voted to allow you to remove this restriction, You would have to immediately stop short-term renting and advertising all your units and get a short-term rental license for each one before you can start renting and advertising. So I kind of see that as a problem that would have to be worked out too.
Well, Neil had something, so let's.
Well, just based on Janet's comments, because that's how the Grand Lodge, which is the second largest pool of short-term rentals within.
But they're required to be short-term rentals.
Exactly, they are deed restricted under their declaration that they, the exact same language as the elevation, that they are required to short-term use.
But-
The difference is, there are multiple ownership throughout.
Yeah,
They're
LMS,
condominiumized.
but LMS and Westfall don't.
They're-
That's the same thing, they function totally differently.
They are not deed restrict or declaration restricted to
Correct.
provide short-term rentals. But, looking at the last report from 22, half of the units within both LMS, Westwall, and most of the larger complexes participate in some type of short-term rental.
I think a pretty simple way to look at it is with the hotel part, the hotel rooms, you know, 140, whatever, and I'm just throwing something out here, this is a work session, so, you know, give something to think about, but, you know, short-term rental license on the condominiums that are privately owned, that are put back into the pool. You know, those would be short-term rental. The hotel part would still be, you know, there, you know, would be exempt from short-term rentals. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, just to touch on something that you said, and this is far down the road and more of how that's, if this gets that far, how it's organized or. The nuance worked out. You've got a situation at the Westwall Lodge where, they've gone through some growing pains with people wanting to rent on their own or, through a different company, but then we run into issues with the front desk and how that's navigated, so. But I don't disagree that that's something to be looked at, down the road. It's far.
We have a little bit of that, but not much.
Yeah, I had a question about. You and your group have been incredibly adaptive from day one, with how you approach the building, bringing in your staff, creating housing for them, Jose, and you've done a very good job with all of those savvy moves. You knew what you were getting into with this property and saw all of the data. What was your end game if this was not part of your plan to begin with? In renting this hotel, knowing the levels of rentals and occupancy.
Well, I mean, this was always part of our plan and goal, I guess, you know, we'll have to adjust if, you know, the town is not open to amending it, and, you know, we saw the model where, you know, we have other options, I mean, we can still go sell these units, just not at the same value, and we wouldn't put the capital into it to improve it, improve the base area, we would just sell it as is, and nothing gets improved, and it doesn't really raise the bar for anybody, is kind of what our alternate option is.
So you're.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to pursue that. And there may be an alternative plan too, where we're, you know, looking at just going and still pursuing this and selling those units as 40 units, but the, you know, it impacts the marketability because we can't remove 12.2. So I think, you know, we certainly have a plan to execute on here. We just, you know, we're trying to be as collaborative and accommodating as possible. Whether that's with.
Was your plan to amend the PUD from day one or to sell these units from day one?
Well, it's not.
Our plan is to renovate and sell the units. We think we can do a better job and bring more capital to the table if we can make this amendment and execute on the business plan.
And if you were gonna, what would be your anticipated return on investment if you got this all changed and had everything would go the way you wanted versus doing this on your own and then getting the payback by renting these units as 2 and 3 bedroom suites on their own?
Sorry, you guys.
Yeah, it's a fair question in terms of how we're thinking about getting a return here. I'd say for right now we're looking at it a bit like, here's what we can go, we're gonna, if we go spend X dollars to convert 120 units to 44 sale condos, I think, if we don't get 12.2 removed, maybe that price per square foot is X. And if we can get it removed, we'll increase our spend at the broader hotel and common areas, because that number is likely closer to X plus 20 to 30% in our view.
I think
I just, well, I had a question. Is there a way to approach this in a stepwise fashion? Where, because you indicate, what is the right size capacity for the market? I assume that the upgrades and the renovation will take several years. In the interim, you'd still like to maintain the balance of the rooms as hotel rooms, because you can't do the renovation all at once. But is there a way to stepwise amend the declaration so that it meets your expectations for the new rooms? Because then you won't have to come back and do 140 short-term rental applications and licensing. And then when you know what the right size is for the market and your hotel rooms or the sale units, that you can come back and talk to the council again and say, we'd like to remove the restriction on another 100 units. And I mean, that's just a suggestion. Is there a way?
Well, is there a number that the council would feel comfortable with us, a number of the 262 bays that, the proposal would be to keep a certain number of this 12.2 on a number of those units? I guess, I think Nick and Woodhouse team and certainly us have been tried to be as clear as possible with just what our ask is here and fully removing kind of this language. And just before we kind of, sit here and kind of walk through it verbally, is there a concern or a way we can help, alleviate? I think our view is that this is going to be a much more activated box under the 140 plus 42 to 3-bedroom suite proposal that we're talking about here, versus what it's doing today. And I just, would love to collaborate and work with you guys on figuring out, what the right number is or what you can get comfortable with. I mean, I think we certainly, in terms of our timing, as we sit here today, we're not going to be ready with this until the 2 years from today ski season of 2025. We'd like to deliver the new product to the market. But that being said, we do, you'll see we've got architects on site this week. We've got a lot of spend that needs to get done and a lot of planning that needs to get done in the next 180 days here.
Thanks, Peter. Dwayne, then Steve, and then Jane.
Couple of different things that give me enough time to cover it all. But, number one, have you looked at the number of people who would, or do you have a way to figure out how many people are going to actually spend more than 60 days in a calendar year or more than 29 days straight, occupying?
Yeah.
So,
Hey, Peter, if you could, just raise your hand. I know we have this disconnect with folks online and folks here in the audience. And so just so we can keep it orderly.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Of course.
So, that's number one. Does it actually even need to be changed? Because the restriction is not that strict, and, so that's one thing that comes to mind. The second is I see this essentially is you're not necessarily changing how do I say this? The bed count is not actually being adjusted. It is the unit count that is being adjusted. So I don't see an issue, with the remodeling and doing all that stuff and changing the product mix. I have no problem with any of that. Because I don't see that there's actually a reduction in the number of short-term units available. And I don't know, at least to my way of thinking, if, this even needs to be changed, or the part about, the restrictions on how long you can stay there. Unless that homework has been done already, and that. My assumption is that when you have a unit that is a condo, that is a 3-bedroom, that's privately owned, but it will be put back into it's the same assumption that you articulated, that they will end up back in the rental pool. So I don't see a big hiccup with anything as far as, changing the configuration of the rooms. It's the restriction on, how long an owner can stay in the unit. And so that's the question, and I don't know if that's a question that we can answer. That's a question, for you to answer, and it would help us if you had an answer to that for us.
And I don't think there's, hard and fast, data to say that, a person's going to stay 25 days a year or 90 days a year, but I think really the crux of it is if you put yourself in the shoes of someone going to spend a couple $1 million on a condo, does it put a ceiling on what you're willing to pay if you're restricted? Maybe one summer you do want to be able to stay 90 days. You don't want to go buy a condo that is then you're restricted. And that's our underwriting shows like, well, we think we could get this price per square foot with restriction. We think we could get this price per square foot with no restriction, and it doesn't make sense from an ROI perspective to go put the money in if there's this restriction in place.
It would help us if you had some kind of idea of, well, what is that breakout, that point where somebody says, well, yeah, I paid $2 million for it, but yeah, I'm gonna want to spend 90 days. And, if you could get that kind of information, that helps, because we're changing this. There are multiple different things that can be addressed. The time that is available for the new owner to stay in their unit. If it instead was limited to, from 29 days to 45 or something consecutively, and from 60 in a calendar year to 180. And I'm just throwing numbers out there. If there's more than one way to adjust this, just to throw everything out is one, but it's not the only one, and that's what I
understand what you're saying. I think it's gonna be very challenging to get the data of like, what can we buy for price per square foot, if the restrictions this or restrictions this. The data we can give you is, because the real crux of this issue is how many beds are gonna be available for rental, right? That's the goal.
I agree.
And the data we can give you is in condo developments across the Mountain West and ski towns. Here's the percentage in kind of this price range that are put back in rental pools. And that's, in the 75 to 80% range. And that still adds better product that is gonna drive more business and occupancy to the base area. So I mean, I'm saying that, that's the data I think I can give you. What, you know, price we can charge depending on different restrictions, I think is gonna be really challenging to get real data there.
And as challenging it is for you to get the real data, just put yourself in our shoes and figure out how challenging it is for us to make an informed decision without it. So, you know, I guess what I'm asking for is help,
Right,
you know?
thank you, Dwayne. Steve?
I have no problem with an exemption to 12.2 for the 100 or so units it's gonna take to make the 40 condos. I think when we did the walkthrough, your vision came through really clear. And I think there's a huge value add to having those condos in my personal perspective. I think if we lose some of those units to residents who want to spend 3 months at a time, I think there's an argument that could be made for a tax offset because we want more people in the base area because the more year-rounders, the more that catalyzes the other development that we've really been craving for so long. So I have no problem with that. I think for me, an exemption in this case versus an all encompassing dial back at 12.2 is more appropriate right now, considering some of the points that Neil has brought up. Relative to one, the commercial tax rate potential with STRs. The other being that town code, it's not town as being kind of a stick in the mud. The town code, the way things are written, would trigger the STR licensing requirement for each individual unit. But correct me if I'm wrong, currently the building, every unit is deeded independent. Is that right?
Yes,
Correct.
They are?
they,
In
they
theory,
could sell each unit individually right now.
right now, so the only thing would be that they would be restricted in their ability to live in it themselves or rent it for more than 29 days.
Yeah, and I thought you were going, and I know you still have a question, but since you're talking about it, is there a way to lift it for the condo portion, but not lift it for the remainder? Cause I think, you know, that's one of the concerns expressed, that if we get 10 years down the road and there's a new owner and all that, that the same restriction, you know, they could then do that, the same thing to the rest of the hotel, and without really any input from us. And so do you know, seeking your investors and your viability of this plan, do you see that as a viable option to lift it for a portion, but not the portion you plan to keep as the hotel?
Yeah, I think that's certainly something we can discuss, and I think that's kind of the question Peter was asking, is there a number that you guys are looking for to stay in the STR? I mean, I obviously have to, there's several investors and parties involved that we need to go back and discuss kind of how that would impact our underwriting.
Okay, Neil?
Just one thing to add associated with that, resolution 12/2021 was the resolution that granted a waiver to the short-term restriction for employee housing that does not expire until the end of next year. And I would think that the council may be amenable to extending that waiver until such time as you figure out the right sizing of the units.
And I appreciate that, but I don't know if that doesn't necessarily help us get comfort and we can go sell these. And who that buyer is, it's going to be not restricted in the future, you know, just an extension of a waiver.
Well, that would just
solve
affect
that.
the balance of the rooms that would not be, say the 120 are lifted to 12.
Okay. Okay, I understand.
And so Janet's next, then Dwayne, or I'm sorry, Janet, then Roman, then Dwayne.
And I get that, you know, y'all wanna be able to do this at a lower cost and, you know, by taking out the short-term rental restriction. I don't have a problem with the number of days that, you know, taking that part out. But the fact that they're, you know, if they're in the rental pool, that they're not part, they don't have to do the short-term rental fee and licensing is not equitable with other facilities in our community, and
Well, wait, I thought they would.
I don't think we would. I mean, I don't see how we would be any different than the larger.
Yeah, to Clear Hill, I thought we all went around them.
Lots of vendors where if they do nightly rentals, they have to do a short-term rental.
Yes, so wait, what was the question? How many STRs are in?
Well, Janet's saying it wouldn't be fair if we removed it but I thought I understood that if we removed it, then they would have to comply with short-term rental
Yes.
license. So
So
if
if-
someone buys one of these new condos
They would
that's
be-
anticipated, and they want to short-term rent it, then they have to come to the town, get a
For
short-term
rental,
rental license, and
yes.
do all the stuff.
Grand Lodge is not required to have.
Because they have the short term.
You're saying the hotel units would as well? If we did it for that, if we did it for
So
the whole
if
building?
we lifted up, if we lifted this and gave them, they could do whatever they want with their hotel rooms. They would have to turn around and apply for a short-term rental license for all the units that are being short-term rented. So during this time, if this were to happen during this time period right now, before the hotel is done, they're gonna have to go out and get 260 minus 70 short-term rental licenses immediately.
Yeah,
And
okay.
then, yeah,
Well,
once
except
new,
that except that we gave them its exclusion until the end of 24.
That was the -70 that.
yeah, that's the minus roughly, they've got roughly 70 long-term rentals, so we would not make them get a license on those, just on the ones that they're short-term renting.
I mean, I wouldn't mind extending for the whole complex while this is in transition, but once it's done, I think it needs to be on the same floor.
And they will be,
And I think the residential units, from my understanding, would be the exact same as the Lodge at Mount Airy Square. There would be no difference.
correct?
From a,
And Dwayne, I got people stacked up in front of you, so Roman, sorry.
Neil, you cited the Westwall Lodge and another building as far as how many units of the percentage were in the rental pool versus not.
Yeah, there was a report.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
got it, Lodge Mountain Square, this is February of 2022.
Right.
But it was 77%. The West Wall Lodge is 51%, the Plaza is 83%.
And so all of these units are not going back in the rental pool, William, just to be clear, so the nature is changing.
I'm clear on that, you don't need to, go in on that, I know that.
Okay, I thought you made a different statement, but then intentions are great, but how can we have a guarantee that a certain percentage of units will be in that?
we cannot guarantee that.
Okay, well, that's.
So what we underwrote was 50%. What, outside, I know we get data locally, we've also got data from other similar condo residential developments. But the reality is, we're at 44% occupancy now. So occupancy overall, we believe, is going to increase significantly, and I can pull up the presentation that we showed before, underwriting it 50% going back in the rental pool. It still increases occupancy pretty significantly in sales tax revenue to the town. But we can't get, we can't.
No, I
force
get
people to
that,
do
just, you also have to understand, it's not necessarily everyone's job here to make their business work. And I'd like to be right in the middle and trying to get it to happen, but if the answer constantly is, our numbers don't work that way, it's like.
Well, I can only, to that question, I can only give data for what is happening today in Mount Crested Butte product and other mountain county products that are similar. So I think, from a forecasting standpoint, we can expect it to be a similar result, and that's all I can give you.
Steve, how often are you at 100% occupancy? 10 days a year?
Yeah, 15.
Okay, not much. It seems like a path forward that gets everybody at least semi-excited or satisfied, and would probably save you guys a bunch of money, would be to give a waiver for, or a permanent exemption for the 40 condo units. Keep the others currently in the traditional pool that you have it in. That saves you from having to immediately file for licenses for every individual unit. I would also think that it would help for council maybe discuss what an annual lodging report looks like coming from town, where we can assess, speak with all of our community partners, and look and start to understand, I think, a broader picture. I feel like right now there's just a lot of data points that we don't have. So we kind of have to, make some assumptions. But I am concerned a lot about the blowback if those other units, if we really lost a significant base in the base area. I personally don't think that's gonna happen. I think people who are gonna buy those are gonna see the opportunity with that. So for me, it's a win. If people live there year round, it's a win for us. If they stay as STRs, it's a win. So I think there's value on both sides, I just don't wanna jump the gun too hastily, so. For me, an ideal situation would be that we exempt the units that dedicate a certain number, because I think we put a little overage in there, give them some freedom in the architects and whatnot. But then keep that other subset of rooms for, discussion next year.
I'm on the
I
same page as
concur.
you. You're on the same page.
That's what I was gonna say.
Okay, and so since we have just a little bit of time left, that's where I'm at personally. I think it seems like that carves it up, that maybe it works for everybody on that point. The other thing I wanted to ask you about though is the volunteer basis for the employee housing. I understand that you're only required to have 4, you already have 4. In fact, you're currently renting much more than that, but we all know that the renting to Vail is gonna come to an end, and so that's gonna leave you with 4 at some point, right? And realizing that you're not required to do it, certainly something that would sweeten the deal for me is something above that 4 on site, and I know you're talking about it. But I would really hate to see you outsource all of it to Gunnison or something like that. There's for you all as well, I assume there's a lot more value to us for employees at your hotel living in Mount CD, for both of us, I think. And so, I'd like you, I know you talked about expanding the ones down in the lower section and all that, and so I'd love to hear more about that and maybe see if there's a way you guys could get a few more units on site.
I mean, to be honest, we're not at a point where I think we've, done the analysis and into a point where we can commit to something today. I mean, we are looking at, like I said, where the 4 units are today and potentially trying to go up a level and make it more efficient for, and appropriate for workforce housing that fits our needs. And it's probably, it's a mix probably that works for everybody and is economically viable. But I think it's tough for us to commit today, to that. Obviously, we want to be collaborative with the town, to solve the issue overall. And, if it's collaborative fail and potentially joint venturing on something that solves a broader problem down the road, but I think it would be hard for us to commit to what that looks like standing where we are today.
And so when you're thinking about it today, you mentioned like things down valley, and so is that how you see like buying units somewhere else?
Yeah, and
I mean,
Nick, happy to help. I was just gonna say, I think in terms of what is going to be on site, I think you're totally right. There's a ton of value to having these employees here. I think overall, what we're not really willing to do, or we don't view as a great use of the 262 bays, is putting employees into those units. But I think where, if we're thinking about how we would love for it to shake out, it would be to solve for converting, having capital aside, which we do, to convert some of those 4 deeded garage units to something closer to 12 or 15. We've looked at plans for that, as I mentioned previously. The subterranean stuff, again, as Nick mentioned, certainly very early stages, trying to figure that out with engineering. I mean, we would love to get 20 to 30 units down there or something like that and have, plus or minus 40 to 50 on site. But we do think there's a lot of opportunities to have some sort of off-site housing. And I know you mentioned down valley, or, hopefully that doesn't need to be 40 minutes away in Gunnison with a shuttle. But again, we've toured assets in Crested Butte that are kind of 10 to 30 unit exterior corridor buildings, things that we can convert to, again, another 30 to 50 employee beds. It's not something we take lightly at all. This is an issue across our portfolio at all of our assets. I certainly know I speak on behalf of South Street Partners. We face this at everywhere we are. Same type of condo-tel deal in Naples, Florida. We're providing north of 100 units that we don't need to. Out at Kiawah Island Club and kind of greater Charleston, we've got a housing solution. This is something we see everywhere, and we know it's such a value add to be able to provide it for our employees. So we're not going to shy away from doing it here.
Mr. Mayor, with
Yeah, yes,
with an eye on the clock, if we can maybe bring the discussion back here. I'm thinking from what I'm hearing, and I've been texting Carlos, who's out of town, but we've been in touch, that what this might head to is a consensus for the council, at least today, is maybe directing a staff to work with the applicant on a package that would include sort of three main elements. One element being the conversion of the 120 to 130 units into condos, and how that would look for a 12.2 adjustment. And I hear a fair amount of support for that, or at least not a lot of opposition to that. Secondly, what kind of guarantee, what kind of restriction does the town want to retain, and can we agree with the developer to retain on the remaining units so that they function like hotel beds, which is of value to the town and which the town quite understandably is really reluctant to give up, despite the fair pressure the developer's putting on you to say, we'd like it all to go away so that we can have a better investment picture. But I think they've communicated that there's room to work. So that would be the hotel component, would be the hotel hotbed component, would be the second component. And third, what can we agree on as a part of this overall package on employee housing units and where? And I understand the dialogue and the resistance to using a lot of the hotel rooms for that purpose. But quite likely the parties, if they're interested in getting there, will find a way to find a number that works, or a way that works, whether it's in the hotel or partly in the hotel and partly in Crested Butte, et cetera. So with an eye on the clock, and I don't mean to interrupt your discussion, but partly my job is try to give you a path. I think a proper consensus would be to direct the staff to work with the applicant here to develop a proposal for the council's consideration with these three elements: the condo element, the hotel bed element, and the community housing element as described, then bring it back promptly to the council once it's in a form that you can act on. That's my idea.
That seem reasonable to you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a conversation.
It conveniently matches the three things that I have on here, so that feels good. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good starting point, and it doesn't seem like it kicks anybody out of the box on anything, at least at this moment, so.
Yes, I mean, I think, obviously we're, to your point, we can't guarantee, there's no guarantees for us on, how this is going to go. We're taking risks, so we're making assumptions. So we ask that, you guys understand that we're putting a lot of capital at risk here, we believe for obviously our own investors, but the betterment, of the whole community. So there are certain things that we can commit to because we know today, and certain things that we can't.
Sure. But again, just on that point of maybe the split between the hotel rooms and the condos, having the restriction split as well.
I think
that's workable to
that's
you?
something we can work with.
Okay, it seems like that's the main, it seems like that's the main thing, and so I think maybe we're finding common ground on that.
Yeah.
Or potential for it anyway.
I think committing to what exactly the workforce housing looks like is gonna be more challenging. But
Yeah,
certainly
again,
talk through it.
And I think that's a more of a discussion point, but I think if that's not a deal breaker for you, that split on the restriction between the hotel part and the condo part, then I think, the other items.
Find their way.
Yeah. And so before we wrap up, Roman?
We talked about this last time with parking. Right now, you don't have a lot of it, and your overflow is a lot that's going away. And change the composition of your product offering, there's going to be more vehicles. I don't think 75% of 50% of the people are gonna be living there year round, but you're increasing the amount of people that are in theory gonna be living there year round. Your average tourist doesn't necessarily drive, even though we're a drive market. So you're gonna have people living there with vehicles. You're gonna have people who own places that are there part-time with vehicles. I've seen at the Westlaw Lodge, there's a lot of really nice vehicles with dust on them, because when people do come, they clean them off and use them, so I'd like to see a realistic explanation of what's going to happen with.
Okay, is it, sorry, is that? is
Not
that tied to
necessarily
the
now, but I mean, like,
restriction?
if we, I don't wanna just.
The line that you, is in here concerning parking, about just, you know, if an owner, is not there, they can't have a car, that covers it to me, as far as that.
And obviously, we don't want to put together a business plan and business model that doesn't work for our hotel guests, our condo owners. So that is, you know, part of the discussion with the architects here. We're doing parking analysis, looking at adding valet, how can we get more efficient that way to, you know.
I'm looking to have more of an answer of what that solution is going to be, if we say, let's do this, let's give this extension or removal of the restriction. I kind of want to see what the end game is, rather than like, oh, we'll deal with that down the road. I just need to see something a little bit more.
Okay, sorry, so is that a requirement for this restriction piece from the council?
I would like to see what
At
your
some
plan.
point, it's gonna come up.
Of course, yeah, I understand it's gonna come, but we're not that, in order to put the money into this project, to hire architects, to hire designers to get to that point, we need to understand what the restriction piece looks like.
Sure, and you know, we encounter this fairly often. It's sometimes a chicken and the egg thing, and so I think what Roman is asking is for conversation.
Sure.
About it, and given that we're gonna have another round on the bigger points. If you could maybe give a little thought to what
Sure.
that looks like, so that you can include it. I'm not hearing it's like a deal breaker one way or the other, but
I would like to see some thought put into it rather than will be.
Sure.
so if you could just include the parking bit, in this next round of conversations we have on it. You know,
Really quick, one last piece, just loose numbers I was throwing around, if we have 40 units, they generate maybe 3.2 million a year, if they're doing 150. Rental nights per unit times 400 a night, give or take, so we're looking at somewhere between like 60 to 120 grand that goes into the affordable housing fund every year. I think when looking at some of this stuff, I think seeing those ongoing funding opportunities that come with these larger opportunities, for me, is a really important part of the filter that I use with this stuff. So I think there is some value in that consideration as we look at some of these, you know, major pivots in the base area.
agreed. And then I guess one last thing, so would there be any, not, Jerry, this is a question for you, Jerry, not taking into consideration any pending legislation, would that change the tax treatment for the privately held units?
Well, and that's the key, is pending legislation. So, you know, I think you can only work with what's on the books now. I get it that things might change, but there's a lot of dynamism going on at the legislature around housing generally, with the failure of that ballot measure and the governor's reaction to that. So I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm actually asking currently without any change anticipated as we.
Yeah, without any change, so long as they're still, you know, so long as they're still categorized as residential, then they get the benefit of that tax treatment. And the investors and the developer here are well aware of that dynamic and how to market that. The staff would probably appreciate, and I think we've heard it from the council, but I know staff would appreciate probably just as sort of a show of hands or a consensus. You don't have to take a formal motion, but a consensus to direct staff to work with the owners here on the 3 items I mentioned, and the parking element that Roman mentioned, so that we can have the package for you that is fully developed, or more fully developed, when you see it next.
You know, I see you nodding your head, that means you.
I always like very clear direction.
Yeah.
No, I'm asking.
Right.
Jerry's asking.
Any objections to that direction?
Okay, no objections, Jerry.
Terrific, thank you.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation. Thanks for everybody.
Hope it's not
Brought as well.
worse off.